The soft crackle of the campfire was the only sound for miles, its flickering flames casting long shadows across the faces of the travelers seated in a tight circle. The air was still, heavy with the scent of sagebrush and dust, and the glow of the fire seemed to draw them closer, as if seeking warmth not just for their bodies but for their souls. In the center of the circle sat old Hank, a figure weathered by time and the harsh realities of the frontier. His face, etched with the lines of countless sunsets, held a calm wisdom that kept the group captivated. He leaned forward, the flames reflecting in his deep-set eyes, and began to speak. "Folks, out here in the wild, we've got more than just the wolves and the outlaws to fear. The land itself holds stories of brave men, of lost souls, and of the mysteries that not even the oldest cowboy can explain. But those stories, well, they're the kind that stay alive only as long as someone tells them. And that's where I come in." The travelers shifted in their seats, feeling the weight of his words. This wasn't just some old-timer spinning tales. There was something real in the way he spoke, as if the land itself had entrusted him with its secrets. "Now, let me tell you about Jacob Rattler Callahan," Hank said, his voice low and gravelly. He was a man like any other, tough, determined, and just looking to get by in this wild world. But fate, well, she had other plans for him. The tale of Jacob Callahan. Jacob Rattler Callahan had been writing for days. The sun was merciless, the winds carrying the dry scent of desolation across the plains. His horse, Dusty, had grown tired, and so had Jacob. When he spotted a town on the horizon, its weathered buildings leaning into the wind like the last remnants of civilization, he breathed a sigh of relief. The town was a ghost of itself, forgotten by time. Faded signs swayed in the breeze, windows shattered, and not a soul in sight. But Jacob didn't care about its condition. All he needed was a place to rest. As he tied Dusty to a post outside the saloon, a cold shiver crawled up his spine. The sun was still high, yet the shadows seemed longer than they should have been, creeping along the ground like they had a life of their own. He pushed the saloon doors open and stepped inside. The place was empty, save for the dust swirling in the beams of light that pierced through the broken windows. He called out, his voice echoing in the silence, but no one answered. The air was thick, heavy with something he couldn't quite name, a feeling that wrapped around his chest like a noose, tightening with every step he took. Jacob wasn't a superstitious man, but even he couldn't shake the sense that he wasn't alone. As he crossed the room, the floorboards creaked beneath his boots, each step louder than the last. His hand drifted to his revolver, a reflex that had kept him alive more times than he cared to remember. And that's when he heard it. A whisper. Faint, like the wind, but clearer. It wasn't words, but something primal, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He turned sharply, his heart pounding in his chest. Nothing. Just the emptiness of the saloon, and yet, he knew something was watching. Suddenly, the room darkened, though the sun hadn't set. The temperature dropped, and Jacob could see his breath misting in the air. The whispers grew louder, circling him, taunting him. His pulse quickened as his eyes darted around, searching for the source. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw it. A shadow, darker than night itself, slithered across the floor, rising slowly to take form. It was the shape of a man, no, several men. Their faces twisted in agony, their eyes hollow and black. These were not the faces of the living. Jacob's grip tightened on his gun, but his instincts screamed at him that bullets wouldn't stop whatever this was. "Leave," a voice rasped from the darkness. "This town ain't for the livin'." Jacob's heart pounded in his ears, but he wasn't the kind of man to back down, even against forces he couldn't explain. He'd heard stories of places like this, towns where tragedies had left scars too deep to heal, where the spirits of the dead lingered, trapped in an endless cycle of torment. But he never believed them. Not until now. "What happened here?" he asked, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his throat. The shadows twisted, their forms flickering like flames in the wind. "We fought, we died. Forgotten. This town, it's cursed." Jacob took a step back, his mind racing. He didn't know what battle these spirits spoke of, but he knew one thing: he had to leave. Yet as he turned to the door, the shadows surged, blocking his path. They weren't letting him go. With no other choice, Jacob did the only thing he could. He faced them head on. "Then let me help," he said, voice firm, though the chill in the air seemed to sap the warmth from his bones. "Tell me what needs to be done." For a long moment, the shadows hesitated, the whispers dying down to a mere murmur. Finally, the one that had spoken to him before stepped forward, its form clearer now, like a man in his prime. "End this suffering," the shadow said. "The battle is over, but we are bound to it. Break the curse." Jacob nodded, though he didn't know how he'd do it. The spirits faded, and the air warmed once more, leaving him alone in the dilapidated saloon. Old Hank leaned back in his seat, the fire casting eerie shadows across his face. "Jacob did what he had to do," he said softly, "but whether the curse was truly lifted, well, that's for another time." The travelers sat in silence, the weight of the story hanging in the air like the smoke from the campfire. Some shifted uncomfortably, others gazed into the flames, lost in thought. Finally, one of them spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "Does that town still exist?" Old Hank smiled, his eyes twinkling with a knowing look. "Who's to say? The desert has a way of keeping its secrets. If you're ever riding through and see a town that don't seem quite right, well, you'll know." The campfire crackled, and the desert wind carried a faint whisper across the plains.